Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 61st episode of the PB Political Podcast. I'm Eshan Pokhrel. Michael Boddicker and Cameron Cummings are unavailable today due to prior engagements, but we're joined by guests Cathy Reisenwitz and Rob Clark of the Housing for Huntsvillians podcast and Huntsville New Liberals organization. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us, Eshan.
Yeah.
So we'll just go ahead and get into this. Just introduce yourselves, who y'all are, what y'all do, and I guess, just how you've found a passion for housing, obviously, and everything else that y'all get up into.
Oh, man. Okay. Try to be brief. I'm Cathy. I started Huntsville New Liberals, which is a chapter of the Center for New Liberalism, the DC-based think tank with chapters all over the world, in June of this year, to get started in being active in local politics and to make friends, because I moved back to Huntsville, Alabama from San Francisco about a year and a half ago, and I don't work on the Arsenal, and I don't go to church, and I don't have kids, and I don't do sports, so it was really difficult to find a community here. I've been involved in politics my whole career in one way or another. I worked for the school paper when I was in college, and really got local pilled when I lived in San Francisco, worked on housing policy there. So started the Housing for Huntsvillians podcast in August when I realized that Huntsville has a lot of things that we could do better in terms of policy, but I think the highest ROI thing we could do is house every Huntsvillian, lower the average cost of housing, by building a lot more housing, by making it legal, by changing our laws and regulations around housing. So yeah, that's pretty much me. Rob?
I'm co-lead for Huntsville Liberals and got the Housing for Huntsvillians podcast. Mainly in a production capacity.
Rob, I think your audio is kind of glitching for us. So if you could just I don't know what's happening there. Just try talking again. It was cutting in and out a little bit. It wasn't showing up on my feed. Still, the issue's still persisting. I'm not sure what that is. We'll be right back. And we're back. Sorry about the delay. Rob, go ahead and introduce yourself again with a functioning microphone.
Got it. I'm Rob. I'm a co-lead of Huntsville New Liberals, and I actually wasn't involved in politics really until I met Cathy a couple of months ago, and you were one of the first people that actually had not just the desire to make change, but actual viable ways to go about trying to make that change happen, which is not something you run into often, especially these days. You hear a lot of people complaining about politics, but no one really has a solution. So it was... Yeah. So that's how I got involved.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get into what those solutions are. So just to start off with housing, it's y'all's biggest topic, and it's important. Huntsville especially, obviously we mentioned it a lot in our podcast. It's where most of our staff and all of our podcast hosts are from. And obviously Huntsville's grown a lot in recent years. Obviously, as the good things about cities grow, things like crime and homelessness and a lot of other issues become more rampant. So I guess y'all are kind of trying to, not obviously because there is homelessness, but you're trying to kind of counteract what could be worse. You could say, I guess. What are y'all solutions, I guess, for things like homelessness and just affordable housing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basics of the issue are just incredibly simple. Housing has gone up in price many times faster than inflation. It's part of a group of costs that are going up, whereas things like televisions and communications, most technology, the costs are going down relative to wages. Things like healthcare, housing, and education, the costs are not just going up, but going up really, really high, really fast. And so with housing, the reason is, again, quite simple. And it's important to note that housing is the biggest expenditure for most families. So this is a very consequential thing to rise in price. And the reason is that we have not built enough homes in places where people want to or need to live. And when you have increasing demand and steady or declining supply, prices rise, and housing is no exception. So when you have unaffordable housing, you have all sorts of other problems. Obviously, money that could be going to education, healthcare, nutrition, educational opportunities is going to rent instead or to mortgages instead. And then you have other attendant problems, such as the fact that people are losing their housing. There are lots of contributing factors to homelessness, especially in terms of who becomes homeless. But the number one cause of homelessness is a lack of affordable housing. And so we're trying to build more homes, build more affordable kinds of homes to eliminate homelessness, because it doesn't need to exist. We can have enough housing for everybody if we get the things that are keeping the supply artificially low out of the way.
Yeah, one thing I always find interesting just in like that discussion is how like luxury goods, I guess you could call them, like TVs and stuff, those prices have exponentially decreased or stayed the same over the last 20 years, while everything else that you actually need to live is actually increased a lot, which is just kind of interesting, the point we've made in technology and I guess in civilization. So going into like, what are those things that need to be lifted? What needs to be changed? From y'all's perspective, what do you guys think the city of Huntsville and city of Madison can do to start working towards this goal? And do you think they want to work towards this goal?
You know, I've only been working on the issue in Huntsville for a few months, really, like June, July. Really hardcore. I started in August. So I don't know. I definitely see signs that Huntsville wants to fix the problem. But it's also like, okay, it's not a mystery what causes it. So what are the forces that have kept it from being solved up to this point? And that's kind of what I'm working on figuring out right now. But the solution, I mean, there are several things that go into how much housing costs. Obviously, labor is huge. Obviously, materials are huge. But the other two things are bureaucracy and land costs. And the bureaucracy and land costs are, to a large extent, dictated by policy. So things like zoning and building code regulations have a huge impact on how expensive housing is. So zoning works in a few ways. The two ways that zoning increases the cost of housing is it increases the cost of the land by limiting how much land is available for homes to be built, for developers to build homes on. So all else equal, if developers can build homes on lots of land, lots of lots, they can build more homes, and land then becomes less expensive because the supply increases and the demand stays the same. But zoning limits the amount of land that developers can build on. It also, much more importantly, limits how many units a developer can build on any particular parcel. And this is quite intentional. I mean, it's called exclusionary zoning for a reason. Zoning was developed to limit how many units and what kind of units developers can build on a parcel, to exclude lower income and disproportionately less white populations from certain neighborhoods. That's the purpose of exclusionary zoning. And so that obviously, if you force fewer units to exist on a parcel of land and you require that those units be larger, so that the average size of homes in the U.S. since the 1970s has increased dramatically, in part due to these zoning issues. It's also a problem that if developers can only build a certain number of units because they're limited in how many units they can build on a parcel of land, they're going to build the most expensive and profitable units first and foremost. So that also increases the average cost of housing. And then there are building code requirements that artificially increase the cost of housing. So requirements that certain buildings have elevators, for example, or that the elevators be located in a certain area of the building, requirements that, you know, every building has to have a separate kitchen for every resident, or every unit of housing has to have its own kitchen and bathroom. These are all code requirements that often have nothing to do with health or safety, but again are about, we don't want to live next to the kind of person who can afford the kind of building that would be legal to build if we didn't have these requirements and regulations. So strong, again, that limiting the supply of housing increases the cost of housing, and that exclusionary zoning and building code requirements limit the supply of housing, which thereby increases the cost of every unit of housing. And the last thing I would say is related to zoning and building codes is the permitting process. So in many municipalities, you bring an application for a permit to the city, and they can either give you the permit to build by right or under discretionary review. So by right means if the permit application includes details that meet all zoning and building code and, you know, fire and safety and all those requirements, then you get a permit by right. Under discretionary review, the powers that be, or possibly any of your neighbors, can stop or delay the process for whatever reasons, which then adds to the cost of building, because those delays add costs. Usually you have to pay a mortgage on the land while you're navigating the process. In San Francisco, the process is so bad that there's a whole profession called a permit expediter. And these people, their entire job is just to help builders and developers navigate the permitting process. And the permitting process can last up to 10 years in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, and can add up to $1 million in costs just in red tape and bureaucracy to a project, which that cost then gets passed on to renters and buyers.
Yeah, so I guess one thing, if any of the listeners, I know a lot probably do live in Huntsville or around the area, I guess we all see these, like, there is a lot of housing, like there's a lot of new apartments being built, it seems like there's too many apartments being built, houses, whatever they end up being. There are a lot of actual units, I guess you could say, but I guess the issue stems from, like, the stringent regulation and the codes and all of that. Is that, like, what you're saying, basically? Just to boil it down, like, while there is a lot of options, due to all of this red tape, the price of them is artificially being driven up, and people are being priced out, even though those units do exist. So
there are two problems. One is that, yes, we have built a lot of apartments in Huntsville, which is obviously amazing to see. But according to my math, and, you know, I'm happy to share it out and would love to be corrected, but according to my math, we have over the last 20 years imported 100,000 more people than we've built units. So the gap between new residents and new units is more than 100,000. So I'm seeing a lot of apartments too, but I am not seeing 100,000 new units of housing. And the bigger the gap in supply versus demand, the bigger the price increase is going to be. And so it's just silly to say, like, oh, well, I'm seeing all these apartment buildings, so there can't be a shortfall. Absolutely there can, especially in a city where the vast majority of housing is single family homes. So, you know, every new apartment helps, and we do need that new supply, but it's still nowhere near what's going to stabilize prices. It may stabilize prices, but even if it does, one of the problems, again, is that the kinds of buildings, the problem is that the kinds of buildings that are being built are pretty unaffordable to people making area median income. You know, average rents for these new units are like $1,200, $1,400 a month. An appropriate rent for the person making the area median income in Huntsville is like $650 a month. Like, that's what they can afford. And so, again, part of the problem is if developers can only build so many apartments, and they can only build so many apartments, there's only so much, like, capacity, There's only so much land zoned for that use. There's only so much capital that can be deployed. It can only happen so fast. They are going to fill the gap, the demand for the most expensive apartments first. So we have to completely saturate that demand before the developers are then incentivized to build the lower cost apartments. And so that's the fundamental problem.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah, so obviously there are apartments being built, but not enough to saturate. That makes a lot of sense. So let's bring in a little bit like the Huntsville New Liberals aspect. Is that connected to housing, or is that its own separate entity? And do you guys use that label more to lobby, or like what do y'all do with that label itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've only been around since June. So right now we're just doing Huntsville New Liberals as basically a way to create community and coalitions among everyone who is not right-wing in Huntsville. So that can be center-left, that can be moderate, that can be far-left. Like, everyone is welcome. Right-wingers are welcome too, but like, that's not the purpose. But if you want to come. But I just couldn't find a good way to get integrated into left and left of center community in Huntsville. And so I was like, I guess I have to make it. And obviously when you start something, then people come out of the woodwork and be like, why didn't you just join my thing? And I'm like, because I didn't know about it, because you don't update your website. We have a happy hour every month, and there are free drinks. We often will have a speaker, just a place to like come meet people, get together, figure out where you belong. You know, we love to have people from different organizations show up and like recruit and just tell people what's available to them in Huntsville. And so when I started Huntsville New Liberals, I didn't know much about Huntsville. I didn't know much about, I knew like its history kind of. I'd grown up here, but I didn't pay any attention to local politics when I was growing up here in high school. And I was like, okay, I'm used to from San Francisco focusing on housing. I definitely feel like nationwide the housing crisis is one of the, most important things you could possibly focus on in terms of policy. But maybe Huntsville's different. But the more I looked into it and talked to people and dug into the data, I thought, no, I think housing is actually the most important thing to focus on, even here in Huntsville. And so that's why Housing for Huntsvillians is a project of Huntsville New Liberals. It's the main project of Huntsville New Liberals, aside from the happy hour.
Yeah, so it's a lot of like social getting together, but like, so where does the political? Is there plans for like a little bit more of a political engagement within local politics?
Definitely. Yeah. So Center for New Liberalism, Huntsville New Liberals is a chapter of Center for New Liberalism. Center for New Liberalism is a 501c4, so we can, support candidates. And I'd absolutely love to help in any way we can. So I, would love to recruit candidates to run for local offices up to state. I don't think we want to be active outside of Alabama. I would love to connect candidates with training. We are obviously going to, if we find aligned candidates, and when we find aligned candidates, knock on doors, phone bank, fundraise, all those things. Obviously, I have a preference for candidates who support smart growth and urbanism, but any candidate who our members are pumped about, I'm happy to help facilitate any kind of support that we can offer them.
Yeah, so I guess just a couple more questions about this, and then we'll go back into housing. What would like the value? I guess because like you have a pretty diverse coalition, so like just what would like the value set be outside of those 2 points? And like, because I guess you can't really put everybody in the same pathway, especially in local elections. It's much more. I think people are much more ambiguous politically at the local level, which is probably for the better. Especially in Huntsville, I know our Huntsville's city races are nonpartisan. So, what would you look for at like a candidate level?
A good question. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do feel like housing is a really good litmus test. And maybe it's self-serving for me to say that. But I do think it's true, because here's the thing. there are two kinds of people, as far as I can tell, who oppose getting exclusionary zoning and outdated, unhelpful building code regulations out of the way so developers can build housing that's affordable to people who make middle and low income families. There are people who don't understand empirical evidence, or like haven't been exposed to it, or don't understand it, or refuse to believe it. And there are people who have an incentive to reject it. And I think that's a pretty good basis on which to support a candidate. Are you incentivized for some reason to oppose the policy that helps a vast majority of people, but particularly people who need help the most, and unlocks economic growth? Building more housing, especially more affordable forms of housing, is just such a winner in terms of policies. It helps so many aspects of society. It's fundamentally progressive, but not in a way anybody should oppose, again, unless they're incentivized for some reason to oppose it. So, that's my big litmus test. But, if other people who, show up to the happy hours and want to get involved have other things that they, like, we have somebody who's very active with the New Liberals who is really big on refugees and helping refugees. And, if they want to use that as a litmus test, I think that's great too. So it just kind of depends, but that's my big thing.
Yeah. Do y'all have any plans at, I guess not plans, but are y'all looking at any races in 2025? And a city council in Madison and Huntsville comes up in 2025, some of the districts, and so is the mayor. Are there any plans to look into working with a candidate? So far, I know we're two years out but still.
Yeah, I think we're paying a lot of attention to what our city council members are saying and doing about housing. We're noticing when John Meredith says, I don't want any new apartments in my district. We're noticing when Devin Keith just got the city council to approve hiring someone whose whole job is going to be to help the city build more affordable housing. So, yeah, we're paying attention, and we hope that someone who is running we hope everybody on the council makes good decisions about housing and says good things about housing, and we can support all of them for re-election, or that someone challenges someone who has a better policy on housing. But we're just watching, and our memories are long.
All right. Yeah, that's, I guess, all you can do. We're still about 22 months out of these city council elections, so still have time for all that. Let's go back into a little bit more of housing, especially with how, I guess you said you came from San Francisco back to Huntsville. How was that shift, working in housing in San Francisco, coming back to Huntsville? How was that on a professional level?
Oh, it was wild. It was really, really surprising. I think at first I was surprised by the differences, obviously, between living in Huntsville and living in San Francisco, and the differences in how those two cities are governed. I feel like, and we talked about this when you came on our podcast, but, I just feel like Huntsville is so much better governed than San Francisco. Just things like, they're not being trashed all over the place, and the roads being in better condition, and just stuff like that. And then it started to shock me how similar San Francisco was to Huntsville, just 20 to 30 years behind schedule, right? That Huntsville was doing the exact same things San Francisco had done, importing a lot of new people, importing people who were disproportionately higher income than the people who already live here, not building enough homes for them. Of the homes that they're building, making sure that they're primarily only affordable to the people with high incomes who are moving in, allowing people to be displaced to
seem to be having a connectivity issue. Wait 1 second. I think I cut out for a second there. I guess the recording is cut after you're just talking about people being displaced, and just pick up after that. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, just like in San Francisco, people are having to commute longer distances because they're displaced from their more central housing because the cost of housing, average cost of rent in the city itself has gone up because supply is not keeping up with demand, building luxury units. And just not only are rates of homelessness increasing in Huntsville, just like they shot up in California after California stopped building new homes where people wanted to live, but the face of homelessness is changing. People are experiencing homelessness. Not only are more people becoming homeless, but more of them are unsheltered, and more of them are suffering from severe mental illness and addiction. And, they're walking around and people are having to interface with people who are homeless and suffering from mental illness and addiction. And it's just these are problems that are going to continue if we don't make drastically different decisions than the city government in San Francisco made. And I'm really optimistic despite that very dark picture, because we are 20 years behind, because we know how this story ends. We have the information, we have the example of San Francisco, what not to do. And because I feel like the people who live in Huntsville they just seem a lot more pragmatic and straightforward, and willing to work together than the people in San Francisco. And so I feel like that all really bodes well for us not ending up where San Francisco is right now. But we have to get educated, we've got to get organized, and we've got to get active. And so that's kind of where I see my role here, is in I've seen the future, it's not great, let's avoid it while we can, let's avoid it as soon as possible, and learn from others' mistakes.
Yeah, so your long-term goal, obviously, is to end homelessness. That's probably 2026 is the the hopeful year, correct?
Yep.
But in the short term, as we move into that date and you start getting more integrated with the city, with more doing more hands-on work towards that goal, what's the short term? What are there anything outside of getting in rooms with leadership and talking about this and meeting up with people? Are there any things that you have been able to do, I guess, at an individual level towards combating this, or is what have y'all been doing on that front, at least, if possible?
Yeah, for sure. So the way I see it is, at the end of the day, we need to pass different policies. And so I'm trying to work backward from there. What do I do day one, day two, month one, month two? And the way I see it is, and a lot of these things we're trying to work on concurrently. So the two things I'm trying to work on concurrently are, one, identify the stakeholders. So who are the people who are already involved in and invested in this issue, the issue of housing and homelessness, and related issues. So urbanism, poverty, racism, anyone interested in anything related to housing, and the more and trying to understand who understands that racism is a housing problem and housing is a racism problem. So building coalitions, identifying the stakeholders, building coalitions where possible, and that's been extremely encouraging, as I feel like most of the people who I've identified as being stakeholders and caring about this issue seem really open to working together. So that makes me really happy. Simultaneously, we want to expand the coalition and expand the stakeholders so to get more people aware of and caring about housing as an issue. And then as well, we need to understand, okay, here are the possible policy tweaks we could make, and I need to arrange them in order of highest to lowest ROI. So in a perfect world, if we could get any one thing accomplished, what would be the highest ROI thing, second highest? So get that list together, and then also get together, okay, in terms of how expensive would getting these things done be, as far as like what's the Overton window, again, who are the stakeholders, like what are people willing to give money to, you know, what's going to alienate this set of stakeholders. Then I need to understand how to arrange the policies in that order, and then find like, okay, where's the overlap in terms of like high ROI and low investment required to get passed, high return, low investment required to get passed, and then to educate and activate the stakeholders and concerned audiences on, okay, this is the policy, this is why we're pushing it. And then just from a like levers perspective, like who can do it? You know, does it need to be the city council? Does it need to be the planning commission? Does it need to be, do we have to go to the state? Like, do we, you know, is it one guy who like really cares about this? Is it a planner? You know, I need to figure that out as well. So those are the things that I'm working on.
Yeah, that makes sense that you have to go a little longer term and more broad for an issue as broad as this and as pervasive, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think those are like those are good steps forward. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. People in Huntsville want to work together. People in the South normally tend to like want to work together. There's more of a sense of community that I noticed when I'm like here compared to like places like I was in Connecticut a couple weeks ago, like in Connecticut or like, you know, even in like out west especially too, same thing. I think it's better here in the South. I think that's actually helped. That kind of helps the it's also helped why Huntsville's been able to grow at such a good pace, even with no real downturn, which we talked about, I guess, on your podcast when we said that a lot of it is probably due to, I would attribute it to like what's it called? The whatever the word is, the U.S. Army, the U.S. military being involved in Huntsville at the core kind of makes it hard for a lot of the people to not have work. And gives a pretty steady source of income, and obviously spawns off outside business. So being a military town definitely helps that sense of community stay, because, you know, we don't ever have, like, so far haven't had, hopefully we'll never have the despair a lot of other cities have seen around the country. And yeah, I mean, I guess you guys have a pretty good plan, I would say, just because, like, Huntsville, there are definitely different people you've talked to. There's a lot of meetings, boring stuff that you have to get through before you even get to things like policy. I think y'all are making the right steps towards that. Is there anything else that you guys that I didn't touch on? I think have hit about everything. I might be missing something. But is there anything else y'all want to mention before
I would just say, like, I think another thing that is interesting about Huntsville, and this is something I think we talked about before, I definitely talked about it before, is I really appreciate how people are not opposed to economic growth. And I think that in San Francisco, for example, and I think this is also true in places like Seattle and Portland, probably in New York as well, economic growth is just so like right coded that you really don't get very far saying like, oh, this is going to promote economic growth. I don't feel like we have that problem in Huntsville, which is great because we want growth. Like, you know, shared prosperity is a good thing. Innovation is good. And so I think that's really helpful. But I think the other thing that's helpful is I think there's also kind of a default, kind of on the other side of the aisle, a default opposition to like government, which I not obviously, but I empathize with. At the same time, it can lead people to not understand governance. And I think the fact that Huntsville is so entwined with national security is probably helpful in avoiding that like allergy to government and governance, which I think probably helps contribute to the fact that we are governed pretty well.
Yeah, I think Huntsville is definitely an anomaly, I think, around the country. A lot of these military towns, I guess, tend to be kind of like an anomaly. I think that's something that maybe I should try to invite people from different military-esque towns, like a San Antonio or Clarksville, just see how their experience is actually kind of interesting compared to Huntsville. That would be interesting. But yeah, I mean, y'all have a good mission. I think the path y'all have set out is done well, as in like y'all are hitting the right. It seems like y'all are gonna do the right things to get to the place you need to get to. Now, once you get there, who knows what's gonna happen? I surely don't. I don't know who's gonna go for what, but overall, I think the path is solid, and I applaud y'all for doing what y'all are doing. And y'all are always welcome back on if if y'all ever need to announce y'all are running a candidate for mayor or city council or something, just let us know. We'll break that story. But yeah, where can everybody find housing for Huntsvillians and Huntsville New Liberals on the interwebs?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you for being willing to have us back on. They can find Housing for Huntsvillians at housingforhuntsvillians.com, and the podcast is just housingforhuntsvillians.com/podcast. And then Huntsville New Liberals is similarly huntsvillenewliberals.com. We have the advantage of some really sick-looking, professional-looking, beautiful websites because Rob is a web dev and designer. So that's been really great. The podcast sounds really good because he's knows how to produce podcasts. If I were in charge, it would just be my webcam mic and sound terrible. Check us out. Sign up for our newsletter. Come out to the happy hours if you're local. If you're not local, just sign up for the newsletter. We have opportunities to be involved in activism and just the other thing we could really use is introductions and just awareness. Hey, you should be talking to this person, or you should be aware of this bill or this news thing. That stuff is really, really helpful. So yeah, thank you so much again for having us, and thanks for coming on our pod as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all check it out. It came out today. Today being Wednesday. This will come out tomorrow, actually. So Wednesday. So this came out yesterday. Check it out. Housing for Huntsvillians on Spotify and everywhere else. It was a great time. It was cool to be in a professional setup. I just have my mic and my computer webcam, but we're trying. I think y'all have a good setup, so that was fun to go on there and talk about all things political, macro, micro, everything. But yeah, y'all check it out. Y'all check out their website. I'll put all the links will be in the description. Y'all know where to find us. pbpolitical.com. Next week we have my breakdown of the Alabama House District 55 race, what I heard and what I had to deal with covering that race. That'll be a fun one. We'll have special guests on there. Hopefully, maybe an appearance from someone very special, but we'll see. Y'all check that out next week. But tomorrow, or today, I guess, listen to this, share this around all your friends, your family, everything. And go to these local events wherever you are. If you're in Huntsville, go to the Huntsville local political events. Be involved with their community, because DC is not the end-all, be-all, despite what we say here on the podcast. So thank y'all for listening. Thank you guys again. I'm Eshan Pokhrel, and goodbye.